Please be seated. Let us pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight. O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you comforted me. I was in prison, and you visited me. And the righteous shall answer, when, Lord, when did we do these things? To which he will simply respond, just as you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. On January 15th, 2009, 10 years ago last Tuesday, the You Are Well Clinic opened for the first time. Its mission was simple: to provide health care to those who were underinsured and uninsured. But as with most good ideas, it didn't just pop up overnight, especially in the church. It was one of those ideas that took many people planning and praying and thinking about for it to come to life. It was just the latest idea in a long history of outreach to the poor in our community, to those in need. Of course, Asbury First has this history of outreach to the poor in our area. This is something that's so much a part of our identity that we sometimes forget that it took some work to bring these various ministries to life. Love is like that, isn't it? It takes a little work. Today is a day when we pause to remember the life and ministry of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., a preacher who used the time he had to do all the good he could and changed our world. He was a man who once said that life's most urgent and persistent question is, what are we doing for others? We're fortunate to have had people in our midst who have tried their very best to answer that question in whatever way they could, to use the time they could to do all the good they can, and found a way to use their gifts in that moment. And though we sometimes take it for granted as we speak about these various ministries that are around, today perhaps we might take a moment to share a few of them. Undoubtedly, we will forget some people in the process. Please know that it is unintentional, but it is possible that we can just take a moment to remember some of those hidden figures in our own midst. And so today is our next installment of our year-long, once-a-month series on hidden figures. We stop looking outward and just turn inward for a moment that we might celebrate some of those in our midst who used the time they had here well. Of course, in our 199-year history as a church, we have long cared for the people of Rochester, even before it was called Rochester. A glance through our archives will reveal there are many different ways in which we served the poor in our area for our first 150 years, but it was in the 60s that it came to fruition in a brand new way. We used to have a group called the Good Samaritan Committee. That's a great name for a committee in the church. And it looked at trying to work on racial justice and on poverty in our area. Of course, a committee is only as good as the people who are on it, and one of whom was on this committee by the name of Dolly Rugg. Some might remember her. She was a small woman with a very big heart. By all accounts, she was tiny but mighty. She's described as having a kind of grit, a kind of tenacity that would not allow her to back down from even the most daunting task. And so it was that on one occasion when a man came in to one of the ministers asking for a little help with some clothing, she got word of it, got wind of it, and the rest was history, as they say. She found clothing for that man, and she could have stopped there. Most would have stopped there. I probably would have stopped there. But Dolly stopped to think for a moment. If this man needs clothing, surely there are others as well. And so she reached out to Ada Finley and Mary Marin and Donna Steele and Jean Billington, and she convinced them to requisition a closet in 1010 East Avenue, the building right next door to us. And she convinced the Good Samaritan Committee to support this valuable mission, and they began to solicit clothing from people in the congregation, one article at a time, just like we love one person at a time. They found that and they inundated this closet, and pretty soon it grew too big to be maintained in a closet, and so it became a room in 1010, and pretty soon it became too big to be a room in 1010. It became the second floor of 1010 East Avenue, and pretty soon it became too big for that one floor, and so it became all of the basement of 1050 East Avenue, where it lives today. Its name was changed from the Samaritan Storehouse to just the Storehouse, and in its 54 years, it has continued to grow. Of course, many of those women who helped found that storehouse 53 years ago, they were able to continue working there until they couldn't, and throughout the rest of their lives. And that camaraderie that was developed in that time continues to this very day. Though they no longer take those mandatory tea breaks, they still are able to share a little of themselves as they work, to have some prayerful conversation, to support one another. And now volunteers don't just come from within the church, but from synagogues and temples and mosques and community organizations and people all around our city who want to come in and lend their hand to do the good they can in the time that they have. It continues to grow. We now have people who are there served, who are referred there from over 150 different agencies, maybe 200 plus agencies from all around Rochester. Last year, we served over 7,000 families. And it's always with the same question that was asked in the very beginning: would I wear this? Not, does it fit me or is it my style? But is it good enough to be given to the people who need it? And there's very little waste, as that which fails that answer finds another use. For I was naked, and you gave me something to wear. Of course, it's not just clothing that has been a part of the outreach DNA here at Asbury First. In the spring of 1991, the Reverend Margie Mason, our minister for outreach at the time, challenged a small group of people to answer this question as they went on this summer hiatus: what could we do to help? What could we do to help the people of Rochester? It's not dissimilar to King's question. It's not dissimilar to the Christian question. Of course, we can't serve Christ without serving others. We can't love God without loving our neighbor. It is a fundamental Christian question. What can we do to help others? And there was one gentleman on that committee who just couldn't get that question out of his head, a retired school teacher by the name of Bill Lisi, who had in his mind, what could we do to help others? Until one moment it hit him. What about a soup kitchen? Could we do a soup kitchen? And so, ringing up the Reverend Margie Mason, he said to her, I have this idea. What about a soup kitchen? To which she said, run with it. Go visit some others. And so, taking Rand Warner and Joan Phillips and others along with him to go visit these soup kitchens around Rochester, they began to take a look at what we might do. And sitting at a dinner one day at the Open Door Mission, Bill said to one of the guests, if we started a soup kitchen on East Avenue, Would you walk all the way down here?" To which he simply replied, "We've walked further." And so they were off. Reverend Mason took a group down to Washington, D.C. to visit another place that was giving food and doing just a little bit more. They had people from the storehouse come and others who were interested in the soup kitchen that they might see what could be done. And it was in that moment that Rand said that the vision for a caring part of the dining and caring center came out in his mind. Of course, one thing they knew for sure, all of the group who was there, is that nobody was going to have to go through a line to get their food. Instead, they wanted this to be a place where people sat down and were served. It was there from the very beginning. It's why the name was changed from a soup kitchen to a dining center. Over the course of the next year, in 1992, they went to various town hall meetings and groups and tried to convince the people of Rochester, of Asbury First, that we needed to do this as a church. And it didn't take much convincing. In fact, people were so in support of it that 200 volunteers had signed up by the time it was ready to open. And then that fateful day happened, January 17th, 1993, 26 years ago, Thursday. The dining center opened for the first time. The soup and sandwiches were made, an A-frame sign was placed out, and they waited. 7 guests arrived. And there were 12, 13, 14 volunteers ready to help them. Ed Crosby convinced those who were gathered around to donate a little money so that they could serve a meal the next week. Rand Warner said that that first day was the last day that there were more volunteers than guests, as it just continued to grow and grow. Operating on a shoestring budget, they used whatever dented cans they could get from local grocers. They were able to take day-old bakery items and cook whatever meal they could manage on a stovetop with 3 of the 4 burners out and an oven that didn't work. Of course, over the years, it took people investing time and talent and treasure, the Monday morning crew and others who would come in and try and make that space a little more beautiful, a little more humanizing, a little more of what it could be, a vision of what it meant to serve those in our midst. Within just a couple of months, the caring portion of the dining and caring center came to life with Rand at the helm of that piece of it. They offered GED classes and smoking cessation classes and bicycle repair and added showers eventually and laundry eventually, computers. They helped the Lost Boys of South Sudan. They were able to help people find their way into fullness of life. It was always meant to be that fishing pole to go along with the fish. And it continues to grow. Last year, we served 40,000 meals to area homeless and underfed. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. Of course, it was 10 years ago on Tuesday that we started the You Are Well Clinic. But like we said, it didn't just pop up overnight. It was the effort after a long visioning process, a visioning process that happened in 2007 and 2008 called Vision 2020. Why it was 2020 at that time, we don't know, but hindsight, as you know, is as such. So it was back in that day that they began to picture a medical clinic, something that we might do. We had so many medical professionals in the congregation, it felt like low-hanging fruit. Why couldn't we make this happen? Only insurance got in the way. This was before we fixed the medical system altogether, like now. And so they found their way to try and do something else. Dr. Mac Everts had the idea. He was still at the University of Rochester at the time, still in Rochester at the time. And he said, well, what about a different vision? What about a different model? He had in mind a partnership with the University of Rochester. So he began conversations with them, even picking out some equipment on his own that we could have come over to here. And others, Dr. Nancy Schaefer-Clark, Janet James, began to get together and coordinate the students and the coordinating doctors who would come and supervise. It was a win-win-win for everyone, for the students who wouldn't normally have a chance to see patients while they were still in those years of medical school. It was a win for our guests who needed medical care, and it was a win for us who desperately wanted a way to reach out to those who were sick. Of course, though she wasn't in the planning portion of the You Are Well clinic, as we all know, the heart of that clinic, the only way that it is still functioning today with as much grace as it is due in large part to a nurse in our congregation, Ida Hickman. It's always a nurse that makes the difference, isn't it? It continues to grow. They've added a meal that they give to the students. There is a social worker that volunteers. Martha, thank you. There are others who come and try to do what they can to make it a good moment for those people who come in. We try and help people find their way into the healthcare system, as complicated and complex as that is. We've added a special night for dermatology, and there are other nights where we just focus on physicals because you need a job to get a physical, but you need a physical to get a job, but you need a job sometimes to pay for a physical. And so it's a gift that we are trying to offer this community. Last year, we served over 600 patients, and it's growing. For I was sick, and you comforted me. Friends, we could keep going. There are other ministries we could touch on. We could talk about the beginning of RAIN, the Rochester Area Interfaith Hospitality Network, when we started doing that. We could talk about the ministries with Habitat for Humanity. We could talk about the grocery bag ministry. We could talk about all of the other ministries we do in the schools that we occupy, or the schools that we go in to help. We could talk about those that exist outside of our region, Project Chacosente in Nicaragua, or the Miracle Garden in India. These are ways in which we have tried as a congregation to do the good we can in the time that we have. But the need still exists. As we've worked with the Rochester Area Anti-Poverty Initiative, we've recognized that the need is only growing. And they've asked for those who are out there who care about this to start thinking about how you might consolidate service, integrate services, so that one person doesn't have to go one place to get one thing and another place to get another thing. And we can do that here. We have a building next door to us, 1010 East Avenue, which has sat mostly empty except for Sunday mornings, and the basement, which is used right now for the dining and caring center. We have a vision for making something else happen in that place. We have a vision of turning it into an outreach center, of building something, not redoing the building, but adding something new, a new addition, so that we can have an accessible entrance, someplace for everyone to go in, to be treated as a human being, a holistic place and integrated services so that all can find the help that they need in the moments they can, but it will take some work. Our hope, as some of you know, is to raise $1.5 million to finish the pledges to fund that building. It's our goal in the next few months to get pledges for $1.5 million. Some people will pay it over 10 years. That's fine. We just need a pledge to know that it's coming in so that we can break ground. Our goal is to raise that amount in pledges by the spring, so that then in October we can break ground, or September we can break ground to be able to pull that together so that we can dedicate that new outreach center on our 200th anniversary in September of 2020. What better way to celebrate our anniversary than by dedicating a full third of our campus to meeting the needs of this community. It's a big task, but we have done big things before together. Maybe it's time that we ask that question King has put on our hearts, that question of life, the human question, the Christian question. What are we doing for others? Truly, I tell you, just as you did it to the least of these, you did it to me.